sack in the summer until the street lamps flickered on and the cicadas started to scream. She even longed for the things I loathed most: homework, rinsing off my dishes after dinner, tidying up my room each Sunday morning. She said she'd lived in that basement all of her life, and was probably even born down there. She couldn't remember anything different before being locked up in the cold and musty room. I'm ashamed to admit this, but, eventually, I couldn't manage the guilt I felt for living the life Lila never had, could never have in my mind. I was so young, so naive. I didn't know how to manage the situation anymore, so I did only what I could think of. I stopped trying. I stopped visiting Lila. No more secret whispered exchanges. No more quick knocks on the door just to let her know that I was there, that anyone was there for her. Days and weeks and months and years trickled by with Lila never quite leaving my thoughts, but with her existence instead. Compartmentalized, confined to the basement of my own mind. At home, it was harder to keep thoughts of her locked away. When my dad brought her dinner hours past bedtime, I'd lay awake warm. Sometimes I'd hear her scream. Sometimes, I'd hear the tray clatter to the floor, the plate fracturing on impact. Sometimes, I'd hear her crying, awful, painful sobs while I assembled new Lego sets in the playroom. Sometimes, she would call out my name. I'll never forgive myself for this. I hate myself for it and deserve to, but I always ignore her. Worst of all, though, was when she started knocking. I was finishing up my science homework for the day when the first knock came. A quiet knock, but a knock, nonetheless. An initiation, an invitation, a confrontation. My blood ran cold as I realized where it was coming from, who it was coming from. I hopped on my bike and didn't come home until dinner was on the table. That night, I heard my dad scream back at Lila for the first time. Yelled for her to knock it off with all the knocking. He cared for her, her little brother, and her mom. He could only do that if she stayed quiet in the basement. She wasn't persuaded, though, and her knocking grew more frequent and louder. I was about 10 years old by then, so I had more freedom. All the freedom in the world, compared to Lila. I avoided my house at all costs, only returning in the evenings, where I'd be greeted immediately by the knocking. By then, it was less knocking and more ramming the total weight of her body into the door. My mother vacuumed the house obsessively just to cover up the noise. She wouldn't even look my dad in the eye anymore. I imagined the bruises blooming on Lila's shoulder, up and down the length of her arm. If it hurt her, she didn't let on. She didn't stop. Sleep became a distant memory, leaving me dazed, irritable, confused, and, most of all, terrified. I began showing up at my school friends, now my only friends, house unannounced just to escape Lila's knocking. His parents clearly didn't like me, and tensions rose between the two of us kids, escalating to a boiling point that ended in a fight. I slugged him in the gut, and he returned with the words that broke me, everything. A blow far more powerful than he could have delivered with small hands balled up into fists. My mom says you're a bastard, that your mom's a whore. When I got home, I had to look up the words in my dictionary. I had to gather the courage to, once again, ask a difficult question. Mom, am I a bastard? I had to watch my mom lose her momentum to stop again. I had to watch what little light she had left in her go out. I had to sit there as she left the room, had to sit there spilling hot tears as the knocking kicked up again. Each powerful thrust against the door racking my mind, a painful reminder that Lila was coming for me. But my mom came back, and she returned with an old newspaper clipping in her hands, worn at the edges. She held it to her chest as she finally told me the truth about Lila and Dad's second family in the basement. I was young, but I needed to know. My mom knew it, too. Through choking sobs, she told me about my dad's old family, the one he'd had and made before he met her. The horrible mistake they'd made, the one that gave her the best thing she'd ever had in her life but took away 3 others. About how my dad's old wife was already skating on thin ice, her cries for help that went unanswered. How when she found out about what my mom and my dad were doing, what little was left beneath her shattered. They couldn't have known about how she carried the guilt regardless. Like a heavy backpack, Mom? Yes, sweetie. But I could never put it down. That Lila was dead, and Isaac, too. Their mom did that to them and then did it to herself. My dad found them in the basement when he got home from work. That he'd never forgiven himself, and my mom never had either. When they reappeared back in the basement like nothing had happened, even after their bodies were taken and buried all those years ago, they couldn't think of anything to do but to give them as normal of a life as possible. Yet another difficult question. But why did they have to stay in the basement? I found out later that evening when my dad came home from work and unlocked the door. Lila came out of the shadows, and I flinched instinctively as I saw her face for the first time, seeing the gaping hole in her face where her left eye should have been. Isaac was a little like Lila said, but the oozing wound to his jaw would have made it nearly impossible for him to speak if he had the chance to grow up. Initially scared, I put on my brave face and took Lila by the hand. I first played with Lila and Isaac, shared my toys, and laughed with them. I didn't meet their mom that day, but would years later. She struggled to cope once Lila and Isaac knew what became of them. She doesn't come out often, but I treat her with kindness when she does. The woman I know her as now couldn't imagine doing what she did. My dad's second family stayed inside, but after that day, they were no longer confined to the shadows of the basement. They became less of my dad's second family as we all became one larger family that laughed, played, and loved together. I don't live in that house anymore. I'm an adult now, with an enormous appreciation for all of the freedom and opportunities available to me that I once took for granted. I know my family is far from normal, even horrible and horrifying in many ways that I helped to perpetuate as a kid, but it's all I've ever known. I love them. All of them. I still visit for birthdays, Christmas, and summer vacations whenever possible. And whenever I visit, I take a moment to be grateful that when I knock on the front door, Lila opens it.